Welcome to those joining us at home. Apologies for the slight delay. I'm going to make a start now. So, all right. So this is the first paper today. I'm going to torture you with this. Next slide, please, Sarah. It's a chapter that's taken from a book that I have coming out at the start of the year. It's not a book plug, but I thought I would focus on the first chapter because I think it's endlessly interesting. You might not agree. You can let me know at the end. You can be as critical as you like. The book is a cheerful wee number. It looks at, you can tell by the title, genetic stigma in law and literature. So it looks a lot at orphanization and orphanhood, obviously adoption, and then it asks whether or not we have a right to reunion. I think we should, but we probably don't, and we can explore that at the end or with the questions. But next slide, please. If I tell you a wee bit about how the book is structured, then today's paper will make more sense. The chapter will make sense if you see how it's sort of set. So again, the themes are otherness and stigma. I've divided it very roughly into 4 eras. Historians will not be very, very happy with this. The one we're looking at today is folklore and fairy tales, which sounds pleasant, but it really isn't. They're quite horrific. And as you can see, we look at foundlings, sin, illegitimacy. Why foundlings? Well, because they appear in international law. When we talk statelessness, think Ukraine at the moment, think Russia. So that's why they're there. But I'll come back to that. The other chapters just merit a very brief mention. The Victorians, they could do orphans. They seem to like orphanhood. You think about it, you have every variety. You have the heroic orphan, Jane Eyre, who's quite well behaved up to a point, quite grateful. She doesn't deliberately search. She finds her family by accident after wandering about the moors. She's rewarded with an inheritance, Jane Eyre, the heir. We have the monstrous. So we have Frankenstein's creature, which if Emily would be too early, maybe to be on, but we looked at Frankenstein yesterday and his creature. The romantic, and again, these are just blunt, they're more nuanced in the book, but I'm just giving you the blunt version this morning. The romantic orphan, Heathcliff, possibly. I know bad-tempered, but he had his moments. And that's when law starts to kick in. When we see wardship, we see the poor laws, we see workhouses. So law is there as well. And obviously, illegitimacy is still a thing. There's overlaps between the various eras. The golden age, I say slightly with some sarcasm, maybe a long 20th century where you start to borrow that from Margaret Cornitzer, who talks about golden age of adoption. Golden in the sense that there was big numbers, but there was trafficking, there was export, there was, the myths of consensual relinquishment, the legacy of which we're looking at mother-baby homes, baby scoops and apologies. So again, quite a lot of law happening. But in terms of literature, think Anne of Green Gables. She was plucky. She was brave and stoic and not so very grateful, again, and not putting a lot of time into searching, at least not initially. At the other end of the spectrum, if you're familiar with a book by Rumer Godden, Episode of Sparrows, it's meant to be a book for children, but it's actually quite brutal. It has a young girl being viciously abandoned by her mother. She's hungry, she's cold, she's bullied by the community. She's very much let down. She's not an orphan. And she says this to people, though she briefly goes into an orphanage. Law is in there, actually, but not often you get an equitable trust appearing, but don't want to give you spoiler alert. So that would be the third section. The fourth one is better fun. There's a section devoted to science fiction and dystopian societies. Motherhood arguably is nearly abolished in this era. You think Lois Lowry, The Giver, a book that gets banned now and again, written in the 90s. Everyone's adopted. No one gets to be with their birth family. It's post-apocalypse. Everyone is sedated. No one sees in color. We're not allowed to remember our history. It's brilliant. You'd see why it gets banned. But obviously it's horrific. To be a birth mother is it's a career choice. And then you retire, but it's not particularly glorified. But it's interesting. So there's a lot of political stuff happening. But as in the best sci-fi, there's something to do with the family happening in the background. So it's worth the read. Handmaid's Tale, you're probably familiar with. Again, what happens there? Trafficking begins even before conception. There's these elaborate laws and rituals. I have friends who started watching it on TV, gave up after season 2. So I'm telling them, read the Testaments, read the sequel. That's all I will say. Okay, it's sort of a comfort. It's not really a comfort, but it needs to be read. And again, Logan's Run, I have to mention, not the 70s movie, the 60s novel, because it's, again, no one raises their children. We only live till you're 21 and you have this great hedonistic lifestyle. It's fabulous. Unlike in The Giver, nobody's having sex. In Logan's Run, everybody is. But in both scenarios, no one is raising their children. So Logan's Run, the children go to, they don't call them orphanages, but they may ring a bell. Irish people, they may ring a bell with the system. There's high walls, there's barbed wire. The caregivers are robots. They patrol about and they've got guns. I'm not saying anything about nuns or, systems of anything. You can draw your own conclusions, but the children are very much raised by machines. When they need to learn to talk, these robot puppets come out. It's horrific. If they need a hug, there's a cuddly room, a room that's padded and soft, and it gives you a hug and it helps you go to sleep. I've made that sound quite nice. It's actually horrific. I would love one for upstairs, but no, but in the book, it's scary. It's just sounding sort of nice now. So there's that. So we ask, what is law doing? And what has happened to family, genetic identity? It's just these alternative systems. But you're getting, next slide, please. You're getting the first chapter, which is folklore and fairy tales. I'm not giving you the whole chapter because it's long and it's tedious. I probably won't get to illegitimacy. I've kept it to the end. I don't think I'll get to it. Yeah, remember to stop me because I have no idea, and it'll be 5 o'clock. So remember to wave at me. So this chapter looks at, I'll say pre-Victorian, but it goes back. There's a bit of Roman law, a bit of Greek law. We look at exposure and abandonment. There are foundlings, changelings. There are fairy tales. And just to see if any of it resonates with things that adoptees think about nowadays, or where does law fit in? Because there isn't legislation as such in this era. There's Roman law, but there's a lot of religion, superstition, custom, norms, things that we behave for fear of, on pain of death. There's an awful lot of law going on. Next slide, please. I believe I drink I've been told I drink too loudly, so I'm going to try and work on that. But someone asked me, a critic asked me, they said, really, fairy tales? Like, why? Why would that? How can that be in a book that looks at law and literature? Are you well? And I said, well, because they've got everything. And I'm not alone in this, in believing this. There's beauty, there's horror, there's magic. What is law if not magic? They've lasted a long, long time. They're even older than me. They're there over the course of centuries. Stories that we tell children to help them sleep, but also to scare them and to scare us and to give us warnings. Next slide, please. There's common themes there that I think may be of interest to some adoptees or to people touched by adoption in some way. Exposure is the big one. Abandonment, relinquishment. Is it always consensual? We're not sure. In the book, I'm going to take this off because it's rattling. Hang myself. We see poverty, sociocultural pressure. Give up your child. It happens even in the fairy tales, in the folklore. This exposure, you leave the child outside to the elements. And chances are they're going to die, but maybe not. They might get adopted. They might get lifted up by another parent, or they might be taken in by a kind slave trader, and then they have career opportunities. So yeah, I'm being slightly flippant, but it's in there. It's all in the, in the lore. So it could cover illegitimacy, disability, some form of shame, especially with illegitimacy, the notion that you were conceived in sin. So a lot of superstition went with that. We have warnings against searches and reunions. I'll come to those in a minute. A lot of the tales warn you, don't try to go home. Don't look for people. There's a lot of fear as well, gives us a bad name, that the returning person is coming back to get vengeance, to get their inheritance. What do you want? And I don't know if anyone, I've personally encountered a little bit of that. I'm in reunion, and my people said, so brother said to me, he said, we thought you wanted money. I said, well, if you have any, that would be great. Fine. He said, yeah, we were a bit, and I thought, well, I know you were scared. It wasn't until I turned 50 that, birth mother was able to kind of cope with, with my presence or with my existence. So yeah, that was fun. It was fun for me. I'm sure it was upsetting for them, but we're all good now. We're all fine now. Orphanization is in there as an essential thing. Most of the orphans are not orphans. They have family somewhere. They may have parents who relinquished them, but you have to orphanize them before you can legally adopt them or transfer them as a bundle. Next slide, please. Now, Scandinavian mythologies. Help me out, Scandinavian colleagues. I'm going to pronounce this wrong, and this is to help us sleep tonight as well. When I started doing the research, I found some, it's not just in Ireland that you have the scary changeling, or in England you have the scary illegitimate person. I thought this one was worth mentioning. I'm going to pronounce it wrong. Is it a Myling, a Mealing? I don't know. I don't want to meet one. It's basically the ghost of an abandoned infant. And they're not living their best life right now. They're a little vengeful, you can tell from the claw. Their mission is to track down their mother, murder her, rip open her breast with the deadly claws. Get the symbolism, maternal failure to nurture. So that's what they go for. They go for the chest. It's a little gendered. They don't go after absent fathers. Such is life. But I thought that was, is it any wonder if this is going on in the background that people are scared that adoptees are after something when we search, that we need to be counseled and warned about the privacy rights of others? If that's what they think, we're coming at them with claws. Can I have next slide, please? Yeah. Now, Irish changelings, you may be familiar with, absolutely terrifying. But this was the perceived wisdom, the advice. If you thought your child had been swapped by the fairy people, all right, quite often it was child was disabled or something had happened, they were ill. But here was the mythology, the general advice: roast it alive. Go for the nose with tongs, etc. There's quite an elaborate mythology around that, and put it in the snow on the roadside. So back to exposure and abandonment. This was seen as a cure. So torturing or dying, you had to go through something. Your real child would come back if this happened. It extended even into burial rituals. If sometimes all you had to be was illegitimate. Other times, if they thought you were a bit odd, you'd gone away to the fairies, you'd come back. Elaborate burial rituals. That's how afraid or how deep the fear goes. So you might have been buried at a crossroads, like a suicide person. Definitely non-consecrated ground. You weren't worthy. And here's the bit that really struck me, because I'm thinking the scandal in Ireland, the Tuam babies, privies, dunghills, somewhere where, you had to be just hidden from view, even in death, and stigmatized and dehumanized. So I should have warned, this was, not the cheeriest of papers. There was some places that would do, if you were illegitimate, if the father had fathered more than one illegitimate child, they would bury the baby, if it died, face down, and that was somehow the magic would stop the father from making more children. I have no idea. Again, if the mother's life had been at risk during the birth and the child didn't make it, it was just seen as this demonic thing, and that there had to be the protective rituals. I have next slide, please. Now, I'm not saying that law goes that far, but there are protective rituals with law as well. We like the adoption certificate. We like closed records. We like maybe no contact, or things to protect. I'm not comparing like with like, but I'll come back to that at the end. I thought this one was good as well. Occasionally, legends tell us if someone had been swapped, right? You had been taken from your original family and you went off to live with the Fae in their magical world where they were wealthy and they had privilege and everything was very gifted. Sometimes people would come back to their original family. Usually it went wrong. It was like, well, where have you been? Why have you come back wealthy? Do you have notions about yourself now? It didn't. Well, and the Fae would get fed up with you. So they would steal you away as a beautiful baby. This beautiful human child, come with me. Very Yeats. Come with me. Aren't you lovely? As the human child started to grow up and resemble their birth family, the fae would get a bit, you can go back now. You know, you're reminding us too much of where you came from, so you could please return if you wish. With the result that you ended up not being accepted really by either. Oddly, that resonated with me. And you're doubly othered because you're not fitting into either. That next slide, please. Now, again, why are they relevant? I thought for us, there's a lot of orphans. There's also an awful lot of stepmothers who I would argue are de facto adoptive mothers. They're substitute carers. They get quite a bad press. You see children going out into the world symbolized by, there's always woods. There's always this dark, scary forest. There are helpful, sometimes helpful animals that guide you. There's usually a fluffy white bird. So, yeah, Hansel and Gretel, fluffy white bird will say, come with me to your new home. I haven't yet decided if that's maybe representing social workers or judges or court system. I don't know, I'm working on it. I'm open to advice. There's a refuge even within the woods. Is it the care system? Is it the court system? But the darkness breeds danger. So even when you're going in here for your safety, there's still going to be, some hidden dangers. And, that woods sort of scare me. And ever since, I can't remember what it's called, the one where they're set with found footage, Blair Witch scarred me for life, city person. So next slide, please. Now, you may be thinking, that's all fine and well, there's no law. Where is the law? Shame on me. I would say, well, actually, there mightn't be law, but there's definitely justice. There's retribution for those who are not good to the children. There's a lot of customs being obeyed. There's norms of behavior. Obviously, superstition, religion. Why are people doing what they do and obeying these things? Fear. I don't want to say that law is all about the fear. It is a little bit, I would say. That's right. I'll have next slide. Sarah, what am I doing for time? Oh, okay. Now, giving you Hansel and Gretel. I'm not going to retell the whole story, but I'm going to point out the bits that maybe have law in them or that could resonate with adoptees. The Brothers Grimm version. There's a couple of different versions floating around. In some of them, it's a stepmother who puts them in the woods. In other versions, it's the mother and father. They leave them in the woods, I think it's 3 times. They make their way back. They plead poverty, lack of food, thinking food banks. And the children, distraught, distressed, they come home. Breadcrumb trail, that only works once because the breadcrumbs vanish. So anyone who's done a little like Facebook stalking, tracking people, I never did that, tracking people down, your breadcrumbs can go. They go, oh, I'm going to block this crazy woman. So there's abandonment there. Now, they get a substitute carer. I'm not calling adoptive parents witches. I've been told I'm not. What I'm saying is they go to this substitute house. They're hungry. This house is magical. They're able to eat it. They get a warm bed. They initially get looked after. Then what happens? The witch decides, yeah, you're going to have to do chores. Okay, so far so good. And she's going to consume them. They're going to be gone and lost and subsumed into her house, her family. She's cost them money. So they're going to have to make up for that. Then she separates, someone's in a cage, so on and so forth. Becomes very horrific. They do, but it's their escape, more birds helping them. There's a duck, there's a lake. They grow up, now they return home, but even that reunion, is that the happy ending? They've gone back. Mother is conveniently dead. That happens so much in fairy tales, arguably in law as well. You just sort of erase the mother, remove her from the picture. She's gone. Father is remorseful because fairy tales are a bit gendered. Of course he was remorseful. He's still in poverty. He's still poor. And they appear and they're, no, we have riches. We inherited them or stole them, depending on which version you're reading. And then there's the happy ending. So it costs. And they had to have this epic voyage back. So there's warnings there across everything. The next slide, please, Sarah. Maybe I'm reading too much into all of this. I'm very happy to be told that I've lost my mind. I'm told that quite a lot, but I thought I could see bits and pieces. Again, women come out quite badly. They have the otherness that they transmit to their children, and the otherness comes back up because you've had this illegitimate child, or you've died and left them. Or you're a stepmother who at one point, sometimes you're quite nice. Then your child grows up and you turn into the witch. So I'm looking at, to give her full title, Little Snow White. That has a lot of that. This is her, rocking out with her friends. Can I have next slide, please? Again, something noteworthy in the Grimm's Little Snow White that Disney, I think, left some of these out. The parenting. She does these acts of motherhood. So feeding, eat this food, but the apple's poisoned. Dresses the girl, combs her hair, is in disguise. The very laces of the dress stop her breathing. The comb is toxic, so the care is toxic. Now, obviously, magic works to bring her back. There's no one for her to reunite with, so she has the handsome prince, her substitute family, the little men, there's that. Here's where law creeps in. Objects matter. If you're going after truth recovery, trying to find your identity and your history and why things happened, you might need a speaking mirror. You might need a magical mirror, something that works outside of the law. Law's not going to open your records. DNA might help you with your reunion. Again, injustice. They do generally meet their match. Those who've not behaved well, Disney leaves those out, thankfully, because it's bleak enough. May I have next slide, please? So back to names. Oh, she's covered up. Can I move this? It's very important you see the goose girl because she's a mood. Can I? Yes. Okay. I channel this, I think, in classes. I'd never heard of the goose girl until I started doing this reading. You'll get a kick out of this because it's pure drugs. So she is, yet again, goes off through the woods, is put into the care of a substitute carer. Her mother gives her a piece of cloth with 3 drops of blood on it, right? So a bit like a birth certificate or a bit like DNA testing. And she says, don't lose this. You will face dangers, but this will remind you who you are. You're a princess. Forgot to mention that. You are a princess. This has magical powers. It will protect you. She drops it, of course, like most, daughters, drops it into the river by mistake. Can say nothing. And her substitute carer goes, takes over her identity and says, I'm now the princess, you be the goose girl. Makes her swear a vow of silence. She says, I will spare your life and I will look after you, just about, do not tell anyone about this. Do not speak of it. I'm the princess. I'm the mother. You be quiet. So she swears the oath. And she never, she could have set these geese on them if she'd thought about it, really, because look at them, but she didn't. So she's in quite the quandary because she's bound herself by law of silence and secrecy. Luckily, she had a friend who was a horse that could talk, of course. It gets murdered, right? This is scary stuff, but it's okay because its head gets put up on a wall and it continues to talk. Now, not sure if that represents law, legal process, or the opening of records, but it works to her benefit. And it's as an intermediary, it talks to the king and says, that strange girl, you need to talk to her. She can't talk to him because I swore an oath and I'm grateful and I'm going to behave. So the king says, talk to this stove, which you may think that's random. Not if you think hearth, fire, family, home. Talk to this sacred, symbolic thing. She talks to the stove. The king is outside. He's crafty. He hears and he realizes that's who you are. You're a princess. And she gets restored and terrible things happen. You want to know what happened to the villain? Villain gets put in a barrel that has spikes and gets rolled through the streets because the Grimms didn't mess about. Anyway, I thought Goose Girl I would share because, so I don't know. I'm trying to click. Sorry, I could get next. Clicking like an Egypt. Now, I'm not alone in analyzing these. There are not The Voice in the Wilderness. Others you probably will have heard of them. Bettelheim, The Uses of Enchantment. A little bit of a misogynist at times, but he says really fairy tales, they help us grow as a person. We need to be frightened. They help us deal with the things that scare us in childhood. He says more than that, but I'm focusing on that. He doesn't really talk about adoptees. He just talks children, even though to me, the stories he's analyzing, there's a lot of adoption happening, but Hansel and Gretel, he said, they needed that. This was good. So now they are fully rounded human beings. I'm thinking, did you read what happened to them? But say nothing, that's okay. Like there was a witch, Bettelheim. But he says, no, this is all part of the process and, behave. Gilbert and Gubar, Mad Woman in the Attic. brilliant, brilliant book. They briefly look at a number of fairy tales with little Snow White. They sort of merge the mother and stepmother into one figure. And at one point, they merge Snow White with the mother. And I wouldn't dare to disagree with them. But what I would say is, surely it's adoption. Because even in the story, the original mother has clearly passed away. The king marries again. That is a stepmother. That's a de facto adoption. I just think it's a bit of an elephant in the room. Again, you're writing in the 70s. Maybe they were thinking of their audience. And they didn't want to, put people off the hallmark happiness of adoption stories. Could I have next slide, please? Okay, so have a drink. What would be the takeaway from that, and how can I tie that into modern day practice and modern laws? I would say orphanization is still there. That has lingered on, definitely. Relinquishment is there. The myth that it's always consensual. Have a look at the recent reports that have come out of, England and Wales. I have some quotes at the end. I might not get to them, but those are, very much as the mothers said, please don't say it was voluntary. But even yet, in modern court cases with freeing orders, they will say, I want it noted that I fought to keep my child, so I'm not going to consent. So therefore, the court uses freeing. And they say, you see mothers saying, I want the child to know that I fought for them. I tried to keep them. I didn't just hand them over. So I think that's there. I love that. Magic, protective spells. Are we protecting the child by changing their name and identity? Or are we protecting the adoptive family? Are we protecting the privacy rights of birth family? There's a lot of protection and a lot of magic spells going on. If you can't get your original birth certificate, I'm sorry, that's sorcery. I just think, it's a sort of a basic right. That's the hill I will die on. I would quite like, I'm old now, I want my birth certificate. Even though I'm in reunion, I want that piece of paper. The fact that I can't have it, I'm throwing a tantrum. For the last 57 years, I don't care. Note the fear. There's a lot of fear tied up with the family. The sacred hearth space. Don't let someone in. We're scared of social workers, as Jacqueline said yesterday. We're scared of that intervention. But we're also scared of the long lost relative coming back. I'm sure we all have stories. We all know someone who got the rejection, got the harsh rejection, or that's like, we can't have nice things as humans. And there's also the backdrop of the changelings, hereditary ghosts, ancestral ghosts, the life that might have been. There's all of that. Do they fear us in that sense? What are we coming to usurp? A good name, legitimacy, money again? I don't know. That's all tied up with that. May I have next slide, please, Jane? Now, wasn't sure I would get on to illegitimacy. I'll do a little bit of it because I'm sort of conscious of the time. But 18th century, I'm going to say bastard, I'm going to say it. 18th century, there's a lot there with the fear. They tended to be male, and you see them in drama. They're usually, sometimes they have the cloven hoof, sometimes they're tied up with witchcraft, but there's definitely this fear that they will poison the emotional well-being of the family. Could I have next slide, please? That they will, yes, you are the fact that if you exist and you're illegitimate, you're proof that laws can be broken and defied. All right. The fact that we exist and we weren't, sort of done away with, we're sort of proof that you don't have to be married and conceived in wedlock. And maybe that's a little bit threatening to the powers that be, because we're going to overturn cars and start the revolution, threaten the notion of, primogeniture and legitimate wealth and inheritance. Was it the 1930s before adoptees could inherit in the UK? I'm thinking we have to go by trial. It was quite late before, is that what? Oh, good man. Excellent.
1929.
Excellent. I was out by a few years. Wow. So it just shows you like we have to do it. I think it's on fire today. Exactly. Like, what does that tell you? What was that about? You had to have, legitimate, wedlocked, proper blood, proper bloodline. So we have subversive energies. I like that, especially in Renaissance drama. But we're tied up with, well, obviously illicit sex, with witchcraft, disobedience. A couple of authors compare us to witches in that we're expensive on society and we're dangerous. So we're a bit of a luxury because we're unpredictable. I'll take that. That sounds fine to me. Could I have next slide, please? Please, Sarah. And again, I've sort of mentioned that one, Smidgen, because I think it's the best name for an academic ever. Smidgen talking about illegitimacy and says, yeah, even, never mind the drama, look to the novel. We threaten the patrilineal transmission, not just of wealth, but of status and power. And yes, fear us is what I would say. What time is it? Kind of, next slide, Sarah. And okay, so I guess from all of this, it's under a wider umbrella of othering and labeling. Why is the othering necessary? Why is that a thing? Think about it from a practical point of view. If you want to stop people having reunions, making their way back, doing a Hansel and Gretel, if you want to put them off, the public denial of kinship, if law is saying you are not related, you're not legally family, like, you know, an adoptee, you can marry your a half sibling. It would be very strange, but you wouldn't, but the law would be like, yeah, we see nothing here, because law can be quite ridiculous and fictional and fictive. But that public denial of kinship, if you want to put someone off searching, maybe that's how you do it. Are they reassuring the rest of society? And I'm thinking of donors who had anonymity, mothers who had anonymity or confidentiality, and then that's taken away. Yes, you are infringing their rights, but someone will always lose out I think, in the balancing. But yes, society likes a fairy story. They love a bit of ancestry DNA. They get nervous if you say, oh, I'm embarking on a search. They'll be like, are you going to turn up on that poor woman's doorstep? Like, no, she's in Montreal. I'm in Belfast. It won't. Nor will I invade her Facebook. It's fine. But yeah, people get that. They love a heartwarming story, but really only up to a point, because we're scary. The family is very sacred. We don't like others. We have to identify others so that we can maybe step back. I'm thinking of green bearded mussels, but I can't remember the theorist's name, but it's like the little mussels, they recognize each other. If you have a green beard, you can be in the huddle and you'll be protected and you won't get eaten. If you don't have the green beard, you're on your own. So I'm thinking we're mussels, basically, on some level. Again, the literal brand of infamy, because we're tied to the unlawful, sinful conceptions. I mean, that's from a long time ago. But when you read the testimony of mothers and adoptees and people that have been through mother-baby homes, the sinful conception, not that long ago, the women are still living, they're still trying to sort out redress. There's still shame. There's still some who don't want to take part or be contacted or, and it's understandable. The double deviancy then, if you are a bastard, you're descended possibly from these wicked parents because they did the deed of darkness and they weren't married. So that's kind of sexy, but it makes you doubly deviant. So not only were you conceived outside of wedlock, or you might even have a darker, something darker going on. Is that something wrong with us then? I know it's a trope in horror films. Quite often, how often is the villain wrong in many ways, but also was rejected, or was abandoned or did something? It wears you down. Even put on the Avengers, like, yay, Loki. Don't mind him, he's adopted. It just boils my blood. Stop using us as a punchline, please. All right, you can use us to be scary, but the punchline rankles with me. I'll have maybe one more slide, and then I will stop raving. A little bit of the Per laws. Even think about when, the early Victorian, as the laws were starting to come in, starting to make, help out with the helpful workhouses. One major shift was to stop putting the burden on both parents and focusing on the mother. So yeah, you can't look at it without gender. And it was here's how we'll reduce the number of out of wedlock births. I'm thinking back to Child Support Agency in the early 90s. I have a piece of paper. Do you remember that? It was all, if you don't name the father of your child, we're going to cut your benefits. Like, really? Is that really how? And we're going to promote the family. There's strange legacies that survive, on from this. And I think I'll stop there. I have the slides are printed out. Of course, they're upstairs, which is really handy. They're printed out. So if anybody wants to read, I will get them. Just if I haven't tortured you enough, if you want to maybe read the rest. If anybody wants to look at the draft chapter and you know, yell at me for anything I'm very, very happy to that. I'm happy to, you know, to be brutal because I do tend to rant and rave a bit. Thank you for listening to me.